So I think one of the hardest things about having cherry trees, if you're going to do anything more than just eat them out of hand, is figuring out how to process them. So I thought I would show you some different options here. That first one that you just saw, I think is also an olive pitter. It's just a single little gadget I picked up somewhere at a big box store. This one is a variety that is recommended by Cooks Illustrated or a similar one. I'll link it below. Um, and it is a little faster. The problem I find with it is that the cherries don't easily roll out. And hopefully the new design, there is a newer design online, is better. This is one at a time though, so you're still there doing one cherry at a time with a plunger, but it's fairly effective. That is a suction cup, and I don't have it on a flat surface where I could suction it down, but it is a really good suction cup, so it'll stick to a counter. This is my favorite. I personally love this. It's not real expensive. It's about $13 on Amazon. Just buy the one that has the best reviews or the most purchases. I call it a staple cherry pitter because basically it's like a stapler where you're pushing down. It works pretty well, and I like that you can do 6 cherries at once. I have spent many an evening sitting on the couch, binge watching something and pitting cherries at the same time. The one problem with it, obviously, you can see here, it's sometimes the pit doesn't fall all the way through the way you want it to. And then also that little holding area underneath where the cherry pits are don't always it fills up pretty quickly, and so you do have to empty it on a fairly frequent basis. Otherwise, the cherry pits start getting in the way of the thing that's pushing them through. Now, this is a very expensive cherry pitter. I saw this at a woman's house who was selling cherries, and she had a double-sided one, which you can't find anymore. And I coveted it, and she let me borrow hers, and it was amazing. And I didn't buy it for years because this one is currently $225 on Amazon. So not an inexpensive piece of equipment. It's something if you're I do commercial jams with cherries, and so for me it was worth doing. But it is definitely way more efficient than anything else you'll find. But it has the same problem that other cherry pitters have in that half the time, well, not half the time, but occasionally the pit doesn't fall through and it's still in the cherry. And so even now, as much as I use this when I'm making jam and I'm putting them in a food processor to process them, I can hear when there's a cherry pit that I've missed. So that kind of gives you an idea of the options for cherry pitters. There's some great things out there depending on what your budget is. Hi everybody, we are making cherry clafouti. I decided that since I had done all of these vegetable posts that it was about time I did something with fruit, and I figured you guys didn't need a tutorial on how to pick cherries. So my one piece of advice with picking cherries is leave the stems on, because when you remove the stem it leaves a little tiny open wound in the cherry, and that's a place for
rot to start happening. And so they hold much better if you can't get to processing them right away, if you leave the stem on. Other than that, I think you can probably figure out just by tasting how to pick a cherry and when to pick a cherry. They are a short crop. There are lots of different kinds, and so you can plant many different kinds and kind of extend your season. But it's something that happens early in the year and then they're done. Please don't buy cherries that came all the way from the country of Chile when they're in season in Chile, which is the opposite season of us. So you'll see cherries in the grocery store again, sometimes in, let's see, June, July, August, September, October, November, so December or January. And that is not ecologically sustainable, and they're also terrible because anything that's traveled for that distance is not going to taste very good. So what I've done, so don't buy cherries in December. Buy cherries when they're in season and enjoy them, and then freeze them so that you can put them in smoothies and make things like this all year long if you'd like. This actually came from frozen cherries. The first part of this recipe has you roast the cherries, and that is mostly to dry them out so that there isn't quite so much moisture. And the recipe calls for 1.5 pounds of cherries pitted and then roasted for 15 minutes at 425. I roasted these for 20 minutes because they were actually frozen. I processed these earlier in the week and didn't think they would hold until I had time to do this recipe, and so I just threw them in the freezer. And so when you saw me put those on those tray, they were actually frozen. I did it by weight because they had already been pitted, and so the weight of 1.5 pounds of cherries once you take the pits out is about 23 ounces. They lose 10 or 11% of their total weight to the pits being gone. So right now I've just taken those roasted cherries. They're nice and cool at this point. I've added a teaspoon of fresh lemon juice. Oop, missed a pit there. A teaspoon of fresh lemon juice, 2 teaspoons of all-purpose flour, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of cinnamon. And I'm just mixing all of that together. So this recipe is actually from Cook's Illustrated, which is kind of one of my go-tos. And essentially, it is cherries in a custard. Anytime you have eggs and dairy, it's almost always some kind of a custard. And so that's what we're making here. It calls for 4 whole eggs. Hopefully these eggs are good and not funky. Had it doing battle with a turkey who wants to sit on eggs, and she doesn't care whose eggs they are. And so not only is she sitting on turkey eggs, she's sitting on chicken eggs because the chickens get under her and lay an egg and leave. And I've had a few eggs that have been a little funky because they've been sat on by a turkey for a day before I get to them. So, all right, so we need to beat 4 eggs, 2/3 of a cup of sugar, two-thirds of a cup of sugar, and other than roasting the cherries, this is really a pretty easy, simple recipe. And you could do this with other fruit. You could do it with blueberries, I'm sure. It'd probably be amazing with plums. So think of this as a blank canvas. It's classic with cherries. I think it's French. And so this is a classic cherry dessert. But you could definitely do it with other kinds of fruit as well. All right. So I need 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And 2.5 teaspoons of vanilla, which is almost a tablespoon. 3 teaspoons is 1 tablespoon, so I'm just going to use a scant tablespoon instead of fiddling with two different measuring spoons. We'll just call that 2.5. Basically what we're doing here is we're trying to dissolve all of that sugar in this liquid. And sometimes I find it's easier to just come back repeatedly while you're prepping other stuff than to try to do it all at one time, because it sits and dissolves and then you stir it in again. All right, so once this is well mixed, and they say until it's lightened, so I am going to give that a pretty good solid stir. Lightened looks a little different when you got homegrown chicken eggs because the yolks are so yellow. All right, 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour. This is my way of whisking, or sifting. I just lighten it by shaking it, because I haven't sifted anything in 30 years. But I figure if I fluff it up a little bit, I'm getting close enough. So 1/2 cup flour. I'm trying to make sure that's nice and smooth, that there's no chunks of flour in there, and that everything is nicely evenly distributed. This is actually just my flouring measuring cup. It just lives in my flour. Just an extra measuring cup I have. I find that's very handy. It's a plastic 1 cup measuring cup. And then we're adding our dairy. So this calls for 2/3 cup whole milk, 1 cup heavy cream. I don't have whole milk. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use heavy cream and 2% milk and call it good. I thought I was going to use 1/2 and 1/2, but I don't think I want to do that. Okay, so we want 1 cup heavy whipping cream. This is not a lightweight dessert. You could totally lighten this up. There is no reason you can't make it with all whole milk or even with all 2% milk. It's obviously not going to be as rich. And it's unusual for me to make something that's this rich, but it's almost the 4th of July and I'm feeling kind of saucy, feeling better, almost over the COVID, and wanting to do something lovely as a treat. And I am lightening it up a little bit because I'm not using whole milk. I'm using 2% milk for the other part. So 1 cup heavy cream, 2/3 cup. Whole milk is what it calls for. I'm using 2% milk. The difference between whole milk and 2% milk, whole milk is 3.5% fat, and 2% milk is obviously 2% fat. So there's a difference, but it's not hugely dramatic. Versus heavy cream is like 35% fat or something like that. It's a huge, huge amount. Okay. So our batter is done. Our custard, I should say. I should have done this earlier. This calls for a 12-inch skillet heated in the oven. So we need a tablespoon of butter melted in there. And so I'm just gonna heat that up. And if you're melting butter and you don't want it to burn. Also, if you're melting butter in the microwave and you don't want it to splatter, the smaller the pieces, the less likely, because it's going to melt a lot faster when there's more surface area. So cutting things into smaller pieces is never a bad idea if you don't find it too fiddly. All right, so tablespoon of butter. Just going to put that skillet in there and let that heat a bit. All right, let's see how we're doing here. There we go. Beautiful. So we're swirling the butter around the bottom of this pan. If you ever do this, always be hyper vigilant about remembering that this handle is hot. It's really easy to forget, and it is not pleasant. Okay, so that's that. We're gonna pour in our batter. This is almost like a Dutch baby, honestly. I make Dutch babies every once in a while for breakfast, and this is not dissimilar to a Dutch baby batter, which is also akin to a popover. So we're kind of in that. Basically, there's what's going to cause the cooking in this is the steam from all of this liquid. So it's going to puff up. It's going to be a lovely dessert. We're having tacos for dinner, and so this is going to be a very nice dessert to go with that. Right. And I'm just honestly going to do this with my clean hands. You want to try to evenly distribute as much as you can. Not easy when you can't see where you're going. And this skillet was probably not as hot as it should have been. We'll see if it makes a huge difference. I've actually never made this recipe. I have a friend who recommends it constantly. And I have a different recipe that doesn't, it's not a custard, but it's a similar kind of a batter, and I usually go there, but I thought I'd do something different. So we'll see how this comes out. I'm gonna get all decorative. All right, remembering that our skillet is hot, our handle is hot, and also quite heavy. Two-handed. In we go. 425-degree oven for 18 to 22 minutes. Well, we'll see what it looks like at 8. We'll see what it looks like at 18. All right, so our timer has gone off. Take a look at this. Nah, that looks pretty liquidy. I'm gonna give it, it said 18 to 22. We'll give it another 4 minutes. All right, another 4 minutes. And they actually suggest that you temp this with a thermometer. So let's see what it looks like. Oh yeah, left, definitely. So starting to poof, which is what you want. See how this is rolling up on the side there? And definitely firm in the middle, no longer gooey. I think we're probably there. And they suggest 195. We shouldn't have lost a lot of heat in the last. Oh yeah, we're way over that, so we know it's done. It might even be overdone. It's funny how that 4 minutes could make such a huge difference. There we go. Get the right spot, it's 195. And see, that's as low as low 90s. So, okay. Guessing we let that sit for a bit. Cool for 25 minutes. Transfer skillet to wire rack. I'm going to call the top of my stove a wire rack. And we will come back in 25 minutes. All right, it's been 25 minutes. This handle is still a little bit warm, but we should be cooled enough that we can get slices out of here. Give you a little more light there. And you could do this, I did this in a cast iron pan. You could also do this in a stainless steel pan. I would not probably try to do this in a nonstick, just because the temperature is pretty high. 425 is pretty high for a nonstick. You could also just, I mean, I was reviewing other recipes online, and obviously you can also just cook this in a glass. Pie pan, if you've got a big enough one to do it in. And that will also work. You won't probably get quite the browning, but it's certainly functional. All right, a little bit of extra powdered sugar, just to make it pretty. So again, this has been cooling about 25 minutes, and I'm just gonna And Cook's recipe actually calls for you cutting the cherries in half before you roast them off. I did not do that. That's probably why I had a lot of extra liquid. This recipe is really forgiving. I was looking at the reviews online for Cook's for this specific recipe, and people were saying like how forgiving it was. So it's pretty hard to mess it up. I think it's going to taste good regardless. All right. We're making a pretty good gooey mess here. But let's see if we can get a slice out of there in one piece. Oh, so close. There we go. Nice. And that butter in the bottom is why that is coming out like that, which is good. Normally an eggy custard like this would not stick, but we had a nice butter layer on the bottom. It really does make a difference. This probably would be better if it was cooled a few more minutes, but I want my dessert right now, so we're not going to worry about that. All right, not a looker because the cherry juice kind of ran everywhere. But, and then just because we're extra decadent tonight, we're going to do just a little bit of ice cream on the side. There you go. The perfect early summer recipe. Cherry Clafouti. Yum. Can't wait to dig in.